Welcome to Neal on Fire, where we talk with innovators tackling one of the world's biggest challenges, wildfires, and the broader fire protection landscape. Today, we're taking a look at a low-tech, high-impact solution for vegetation management. My guest today is J.K. Kinsey, founder of Ohana Goats, a company that uses goats to help control brush and reduce wildfire risk in a natural, sustainable way. JK, welcome to the show. Great to have you here today.
Hey, Neal. Thanks for having me. Excited to be part of the podcast.
Let's start off with an overview. Could you tell us about Ohana Goats and the work that you do?
Sure. Ohana Goats. So we're based out of Montana, but we do work kind of in the western United States. So Arizona, California is where we're setting out bids to. And we have access to about 300 goats, and we focus, our main focus is wildfire mitigation. So our goats go in and mitigate fuel reductions for sensitive areas, I call them. And that's our number one focus. And then we do vegetation management, otherwise invasive plant control and different things. So that's a little bit about Ohana Goats.
Well, every great idea starts somewhere. How did Ohana Goats get started, and what inspired you to bring goats into the wildfire mitigation world?
Yeah, so we got started in the goats. We do we have invasive plants on our ranch here in Montana, and I ended up buying a few goats to get started with noxious weed control. And then I got to thinking, well, somebody else must need our services. And 4 goats kind of turned into a couple hundred goats. And we've done projects all over the United States. And one of our latest projects, of course, is the Grand Canyon project. That was a wildfire mitigation project, and that took place in kind of April, May, June, and part of July this year.
I'm imagining you day to day just working with these goats out there, taking down all of the brush and the vegetation. Kind of walk us through, what does a typical project look like? What services are you providing on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, so when we show up on a project, we bring the stock, the goats, livestock guardian dogs. Typically, we contain the goats with electric net fence, and then we bring chargers, water tanks, everything to let the goats thrive in that particular atmosphere. And then we bring a herder to manage the day-to-day projects that we have on each site. So that's typically how that goes. One of the analogies I was thinking about the other day, a lady that helps us herd the goats, she says it's kind of like a Pac-Man game. If you remember the Pac-Man game, they eat up everything, and there's several of them doing it. And so that's one of the analogies I think is a really good picture of what happens on a goat grazing project.
So now I'm going to have the Pac-Man sounds stuck in my head. Thanks, JK. It's a good analogy, though. I appreciate that. So is the team just goats and dogs? Are there other animals that are involved?
Yeah, so we have a flock of hair sheep that we intermingle on each project. And the idea behind that is a goat is a browser and a sheep is a grazer. And so they eat different types of plants for the most part. They do share some brushes, but a goat will save the grasses for the last. And so a sheep, that's the first thing they want to go to. So as a wildfire mitigation fuel reduction project, they kind of want that down to just about to the dirt. So we bring the sheep in to help with mitigate the grass load, and then the goats, they hit the brushes and the weeds and pine needles and things like that. So that's the idea behind having a mix of goats and sheep. And we utilize hair sheep just because we don't want to shear the sheep, and the hair sheep just shed that each year. It's one less thing that we have to do, but yet we utilize a sheep.
So people always say goats will eat anything, but what do they really go for? And are there certain plants that they won't touch?
Yeah, there is certain plants that they don't like. One of them being the burdock, which is we call them cockleburs in the West here. And then a sandbur is the other one that they don't really like. But any of the poisonous plants that people are concerned that if a goat eats, they may die. A goat seems to stay away from the poisonous plants. And I don't know, and some of the poisonous plants they can eat and be don't have any ill effects. A goat is smarter than a human, I always say, because we may at some point in time eat something that's poisonous that we shouldn't, and a goat doesn't necessarily do that. So, as we turn a herd of goats in on a project, right away they want to focus on the brush and the weeds and the leaves and any of that type of vegetation. So that's their focus first of all. And they're tickled pink if they can get that type of vegetation. And then they make a circle and clean up that vegetation, and then they come back around and eat on the grasses and whatever other plants that they may not necessarily call that as their number one priorities. But if you leave them in there long enough, I mean, they're gonna clean that up, and it may take longer, and that's why we mix the sheep in there with it.
Got it. So I heard you say you have 300 plus or minus goats in your herd. And just to better understand the math, how does it work? Like, how many goats does it take to clear an acre, and how long does that usually take?
So most of our projects are 5 acres or above. So typically on the lower acreages, we don't necessarily have to bring all 300 head of stock to that project. Say we have 30 acres and we turn all 300 head in there. We can typically, we may be able to do an acre a day type of thing, and maybe a little sooner, but it all goes on how much vegetation is in that acre of land. So um, if some acres may be 6 feet high and some acres may only be 6 inches high, so that all takes, we factor that all in to see how long it will take us to do an acre. But, we can average and throw something out there, but I don't think it's accurate. I just tell our people we work for that, it depends on how much vegetation's on that particular acre.
Okay. So if you average it all out, how many goats typically are in the field at once?
If we average it out, they're all out there at once. We try to stay with the larger acreage projects, like you talk about an acre, but we may have all 300 on that 1 acre, but we have 30 more acres to go or 300 more acres to go after that 1 acre. So we try to contain those goats on 1 acre paddocks, and sometimes it's up to 13 acres, depends on what the landowner wants to do and then how long they want them in there. And so I think each project, it typically is a little bit different.
So you may have up to 300 goats on a job. And take me through, how do you get them there, and what's the process for getting them set up on the land, and how long are they there? Are you watching them, or are you just kind of letting them be and coming back later? How does all that work?
Yeah. So typically our goats, we have a semi trailer and all the goats go on one trailer. Once in a while, we'll offload goats onto a stock trailer and we can handle fewer goats on that particular trailer. But once the goats show up on site, there we usually have 2 people there to offload the goats, and then somebody's already been there to set up the electric net fence if that's how we're going to contain the goats. So once we show up, the fences are all set up. We offload the goats, and then we typically keep a herder on site, not necessarily 24/7 because they have to run off and get groceries once in a while, but about 95% of the time they're on site with the goats, and they feed the dogs every morning, our livestock guardian dogs, and then our herd dog as well. And then they walk through and they monitor where the goats are currently at. And then they at that point they know if the goats need to be moved or if they need to stay in there another day or another hour or whatever it may be. So close monitoring, and that's typically the how it all starts, anyways.
So goat herder is not a job I think you would typically see posted on LinkedIn. Is that somebody that you have trained for that job, or how does it work to find a goat herder for your company?
Yeah, they're either trained by us or it sometimes is just me. I'm working on trying to hire a Peruvian as well. So, but 90% of the time, if we hire somebody to help herd, they're trained by us, and so we work alongside of them until we feel comfortable that they're ready to be turned loose with the herd on their own. And then if they've got any questions or whatever, they'll call us in the night. Whatever problems may arise, yeah, we get word of it and then come and help out.
Since you brought that up, share maybe a story or two of problems, things that have popped up that were unexpected with the goats on a job.
Yeah, it's so there's always like this doesn't have anything to do with the goats really, but a dog got out. One of our livestock guardian dogs got out one morning, and I got a text on my phone, and it was 5 a.m. and they said my livestock guardian dog got out. And so we're typically not very far away. We're within a couple of minutes at least if we're not right on site. But at that time, I think I was a couple minutes away. And so I went down there. Sure enough, the dog was outside the fence and waiting to get back in. So I shut the power off, the fence off, and let him back in. And I was sitting there watching the goats, and the sheriff drove up. And so I was rolled the window down, and I said, "Yeah, one of my livestock guardian dogs got out last night." And he goes, "Well, there was people breaking into cars last night. Maybe he got out thinking, that they were a danger. And so he never had any idea my dog was out, and that's not why he stopped by. He just stopped by to visit. But I let the cat out of the bag that my dog was out all night, and so then he knew right away. Yeah, sometimes you're just better not to say anything.
So you have two different kinds of dogs. You've got dogs that are protecting from potential animals that might be attacking the goats, but you also have herding dogs. Is that right? Talk to me a little bit about the different breeds and what they do.
Yeah, so our livestock guardian dogs are Akbash Pyrenees cross, and so they protect from predators. So if a predator comes around there, well, their first line of response is a bark. And so if the bark doesn't scare the predator off, then they're there to protect the goats if something happens to break in. Our other dogs are border collie, and then we have a couple of that are mixed with Australian cattle dogs and border collie and Australian shepherd mix. Those dogs are designed for cattle dogs, but they do work good for sheep and goats. So yeah, and their job is to herd the goats. If we have to make a move or gather up a goat, they'll go out and around and bring the goats back to us and the sheep. So yeah, they're the herding dogs. So I think let's see, we have 3 of them herding dogs and about 4 of those livestock guardian dogs.
And these are working dogs. I don't imagine that they're jumping into bed with you at the end of a long day. They're probably in other quarters and just getting ready for their next day of work.
Yes, sir. They have their own living quarters in a trailer when we're off site. During the day, they're outside. The herding dogs, now the livestock guardian dogs stay 24/7 with the goats. They're shipped with the goats to each location. And yeah, they think they're a goat. They were raised with goats from babies. And I really believe they think they're goats. They live amongst them, but obviously they're a dog. But in their mind, I believe they think they're part of the family. And so they're protecting their family.
I mean, goats definitely have more personality than a weed whacker. They're curious and social and a little stubborn. What have you learned from working with them so closely?
Yeah, that's exactly right, Neal. What I've learned is that the response from people in different communities, people think that the goats are part of their family. They get attached to them while they're in an area on a project, and each morning they may walk by that project and they start naming the goats, and then they're not even theirs, and so they just become, and I don't know what it is, but they're a little bit of an addicting personality that when you walk by a goat and they look at you, it attracts people to them and makes them want to see them every day. I mean, and when we pull out of a job, if it's in a residential community, people end up missing the goats, after they're gone. I think that's one of the better parts of this job. People love the goats being in the communities and different areas. So that's what I found out.
I was going to ask you, what's the best or funniest part of your work, and any stories that stand out? I know you shared the story about looking for a goat, and I guess you couldn't find him, and he was 7 feet up in a tree. And we're actually going to share that photo here in the podcast. But anything else come to mind?
Yeah, just the other day there was another goat up in a tree, and so if they can access it, they're gonna go up there and get as high as they can. That's their forte, to be up in a high, steep area if they can. One other story I can think of that we were in front of a McDonald's doing wildfire mitigation, and this was at the Grand Canyon, and on the fences, I have our number if anybody has trouble, or we call it an emergency. But anyway, one day the phone rang and a lady answers, and she says, "One of your goats has died." And I said, "Well, I was just over there." And I was just right around the corner. And I said, "Well, I'll be right over." And so I went over there. And by the time I got over there, she had called back and she says, "Oh, the goat's up." And I said, "Yeah." I said, "That's just what a goat does. They it reminds me of when we go to a beach, we lay out on the beach and we act like we're out of it, laying there and just soaking up the sun. And that's what a goat does. And so to the trained eye, there's nothing wrong with that goat, but somebody else just looking there, they do look like they're out of it. And no, everything was fine. But that's one of the funny things we have to deal with when we're in the public.
Yeah. Do you give your clients a warning? Hey, they might be taking a nap. They're not dead. They're okay. Anything like that?
Yeah, I do. I give them the spiel on what what looks like is happening and what's really is happening. Where we deal with the public in like there was a lot of people down there at the Grand Canyon, so and they were from all different countries, and so those are the ones that you have to explain the whole steps of this whole process too. But that's one of the funny stories I can remember, at least.
Yeah. So, who is your ideal client? Are you working with private landowners, utilities, government, all of the above? Who's kind of your ideal customer for this?
Our ideal customer is government. So if we like city, state, federal governments are our ideal clients. They're not probably our biggest client right now, but we're wanting to work that way. We do a lot for private landowners, but we just came off a project for a small community that they wanted to come in and have some vegetation control on a lagoon. So it was steep sides, and that's ideal for goats. And so they hired our goats. And but yeah, one of our, we're really wanting to do more government contracts, so that would be ideal.
And with government contracts, do you find that you have to explain the benefits of using goats versus mechanical equipment for clearing?
Sure, we do. Sometimes the government entity is already looking for a goat or sheep herd. So, those people, we don't have to necessarily explain the differences. They already know they're looking for animal vegetation control. But yeah, there's some entities that we have to explain the differences if it's what I call a cold call, and we're trying to get some business from that city, your county government, your federal government. But most times they know they're wanting goats or sheep, and so we don't really have to explain all that to them.
I think there's some other benefits as well. The way that the goats are moving the soil around and also adding some additional nutrients with the results of eating all the vegetation.
Sure, there's add nutrients within their manure. So whatever, like typically we feed minerals to our goats as they're out on the projects, and maybe copper, phosphorus, calcium. So all that goes back into the soil when the goats are there, and then they aerate it by their little thousands of hooves beating on, making aeration spots on the surface of the earth. When the goats are off of that project, and then they get some precipitation, it flourishes. That nutrients makes the vegetation just glow when they leave. So it's a regenerative way to regenerate the earth, and yeah, it has more of advantages just than fire fuel reduction typically.
Well, that's something you're not going to get from a weed whacker.
A weed whacker or more, yeah.
So, what's next for Ohana goats? You have new herds that you're getting, new regions that you're going to go after, or just new ideas that you're going to bring into the business?
A lot of that depends, Neal, on what bids we get, different contracts, and our goals are to be at 1,000 head here in the next year and a half. So some of these government, and especially like the Forest Service and different things, those entities, we need a larger number of goats to satisfy those contracts. So if we can get them, we have access to different ranches to get more goats. It just depends on what they need, and we feel that we can fulfill any contract.
Before we wrap up, is there anything else you'd like to share about Ohana Goats or the mission behind your work?
Sure. I would like to tell the story of how the goats really came to our ranch in the first place. But I was in Arizona. We typically try to get out of the snow in the wintertime, and I spent some time in Arizona with horses, and I leased a place, and out the back gate past the corrals was a tree, and under this tree was 6 or 8 of those plastic white lawn chairs. And I kept riding by, hey, I can't figure out what the deal is with the white lawn chairs under the tree in a perfect circle. And one day the guy I leased a house from, he came over and I had coffee with me, and I said, what's the deal with the chairs under the tree? And he said, well, 2 of my grandkids are buried under there, and they both died of leukemia, and their dad sprayed weeds in the yard all the time. And so that kind of hit home because my grandkids are the same age as those kids were. And so I went back home and didn't spray a weed again and got goats. And so that's the story, how the goats got to our place. But I think it's a good message to put out there that the least amount of chemicals that we can use is is better for everybody, and including our environment.
Yeah, that's a great story. Thanks for sharing that. And thanks for joining the podcast today. It's been great learning how Ohana Goats is helping protect communities and landscapes one bite at a time. And how would you want people to reach out to you if they want more information about Ohana Goats?
Yeah, we got a website, ohanagoats.com. We're on TikTok, Ohana Goats, Instagram, Ohana Goats, Facebook, Ohana Goats, and our telephone number, of course, is 406-971-5812. And
JK,
thanks for
thanks
having us,
again
Neal.
for joining us.
Thanks for having us. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.